Chapter 1. A well-deserved break. Looking back, I put it down to a number of things. There was the fact that I had missed out on my irreplaceable drunken teenage years of beer-swilling sexual frivolity while serving as a soldier, and desperately wanted to participate in some now. There was also the tour of South Armagh I had served, and the dishonourable discharge that had me wallowing in an attitude of, I don't give a fuck what happens to me today, never mind tomorrow. After Ulster, I knew I was going to be a little crazy for a few months. What I did not realise was that the madness would last for over a decade. I was 20 years old, had been in Civvy Street for just over 7 weeks and already hated it. Hated everything about it, the whole fucking lot. Well, everything except for Stoke City Football Club and the hooligans who followed them. That was different. They were different. We were different. And everything that we did and lived by was different. Being different was all important. It kept me alive. I had just about enough money for the flight, but that was it. Scallying to survive was the only option, or we couldn't go. So my childhood mate Eddie and I got to selling the odd illicit bits and bobs that we'd recently acquired. We got a couple of quid together, booked 2 seats and flew that night. Neither of us wanted to miss out on Stoke's first ever firm holiday abroad. It was all anyone had been talking about since the season had finished. Club Tropicana's drinks are free, George sang. Good job then, because we had no intention of paying for fuck all when we got there. Why should we? We were Stoke City, and for the next 2 weeks any cunt in Magaluf who wanted it could have it. There were 160 of us coming on 3 planes, and we filled 2 hotels. Our average age was 19. Most of us worked, but the majority were still serving shitty apprenticeships. We were bored most of the week, bored shitless. Then we'd go to the match. That was our identity. English football hooligans we are, and no, we have not forgotten your allegiance to those wankers during the Falklands War. So, for the next 14 days, we want to get pissed up in your resort and shag as many filthy women as we can. We are also hoping that with a bit of luck, some other football hooligans will be out there on holiday too. Manchester United or Birmingham would be nice, but we're not bothered. We'll have it with anyone, as long as they want it with us. Now, we mostly want it with them. That is our kind. But we certainly don't mind having it with any foreigners, especially the Germans or the Spics. Just let one of them dirty bastards mention the HMS Sheffield or the Sir Galahad to me. I'll fucking do 'em. With that mindset, it was always going to be an eventful fortnight on the Balearic island of Majorca. It was 1984, and I was a cocksure youth with sparkly eyes and a cheeky grin. I preferred doing it doggy, but didn't mind letting her get on top, as long as I could still see the football on TV, of course. I'd been there, seen it, and done it all, and had the medal to prove it. But I was still really a lost kid looking to make up for lost time. My behaviour on our first ever firm holiday was atrocious, as was everyone's. It seems bizarre recounting juvenile antisocial behaviour in a day and age where brutal happy slappings of innocent people are recorded by youngsters for entertainment. In our time, we were all obviously very immature, but in our minds, we really did believe that we were representing the true spirit of our nation by behaving the way we did in Majorca, or for that matter, anywhere outside of England. Apart from the vicious bar brawls and street fighting, it was mostly mischief. I just saw it as a well-deserved break. It was a time for some reflection on my recent past and time to be spent with this new family of foot soldiers that had replaced Her Majesty's own. No matter where this life with these people was going to lead me, I wanted to be there, and always would. Life outside of the firm did not bear thinking about. Potter's Fortnight, a traditional Staffordshire holiday period, was the last week in June and the first in July, and anyone who could afford to travel went abroad. Those that couldn't went to Blackpool or Hourgate, a local term for people who couldn't afford a holiday at all. Nobody is sure who originally organised this 1984 trip. It just turned out that everybody headed to Palma Nova, a mile or so from Magaluf. That might not seem strange, but it is when you take into consideration that we were joined by 20 of Port Vale's casuals, who were well ahead of their firm at the time. They were mostly from the Norton area, in the east end of Stoke-on-Trent, a roughneck and staunch Vale territory. After I wrote my football hooligan memoir, Naughty, people asked, how come you didn't mention the Vale? My first answer was, how many times do people want to read about us doing them again? But that wasn't really the case. The truth is that for many years we Stoke lads actually used to look out for them. We were never invited, far from it, but we did occasionally turn out if they had a big cup game against Man United or Spurs, or a pre-season friendly with Birmingham. We turned up, got stuck in, and got some nicked at all of those fixtures. The way we saw it was that those firms would be on the streets of our city, regardless of who they were playing, and we weren't having it. It was only in the late 80s, when Stoke slipped down a couple of divisions and they went a division above us, that we saw for the first time how much it meant to them and what a delight it was to see us briefly below them. They were cocky, and that was when our hatred for them started to develop in earnest. We violently reciprocated their hatred for us, only 100 times worse than anything they were ever prepared for. Going back to that question about leaving them out of the book, what greater snub could I give them than simply not mentioning them at all? Get my point? That's how easy it is to do the Vale. As you will gather from this short story, Port Vale do have some game lads, and a couple of them are genuinely classed as mates. In particular, Rhino, Gazamella, Ginger Bry, Stanner and Cocky were a credit to their firm on this crazy coming-of-age fortnight, and at times, nearly as mad as us. We needed to find a nightclub to use as a base, one that was full of slappers. Then we needed to find out who else was in town and where they were firming up each night. We could do with a couple of those yellow mopeds too. We all arrived during one hot and sweaty day, and by 2 o'clock in the morning, Tokyo Joe's nightclub had been aptly renamed Stokyo Joe's and designated as our new HQ, our gaff, our own place to hang out and do what we want. As far as we were concerned, especially as the manager gave us handfuls of free drinks tickets with a nod and a smile, we had claimed an outpost in a far-off land. It was a territory captured for Her Majesty and handed to us as a reward to protect for her and the realm. It was absolutely fucking mad, but that's what happens when the English travel abroad. And make no mistake, it does not matter what sort of background you come from. We're all the same, inbreds. That's the mindset of the fiercely proud Anglo-Saxons amongst us. That is something that will never change, ever. Stokyo Joe's was now Stoke territory, and if need be, it would be defended to the hilt every night. Fucking hell, have you seen the arse on that? The first night it was always going to go off, and it did, against a mature firm of Tottenham in the Green Parrot around 1 o'clock in the morning. It was all over us showing a bit of bravado with some American sailors off the USS Nimitz. The ship had been anchored in the main port at Palma, and dozens of the Yanks had headed into Magaluf looking for some European pussy. Our pussy. A drink was spilt. You know the score. He's unhappy his uniform is soiled, and you don't like his aggressive stance about it. In an instant, the sailors get up from their table 10 strong. They are confident, and it shows. You can read their minds. Who the hell do these kids think they are fucking messing with? We're the goddamn United States Navy. Who the fuck do you think you're fucking with, Yank? We're Stoke fucking City from England. We stood up 50 strong and crowded in tight, immediately strangling the Yanks and causing a massive change of heart amongst their ranks. We had sunk them with a broadside of overwhelming unity and a willingness to stand together, no matter who or how old the opposition. With no punches thrown, we allowed the sailors to drink their beers and leave at their own discretion, quickly. We had all clocked the Tottenham lot clocking us with the Yanks, so it was now becoming a moral issue for us. We could not leave that bar after what we had just done, especially as now some of the Cockneys were becoming leery and throwing comments in our direction. Then, as always, it happened. "Fuck it, lads. Are we in, eh? Are we fucking in these or what? Brasso, are we fucking having this? They're trying to take the fucking piss out of us. Come on, Stoke. Fucking come on." And off it duly went. Western style. Stoke v Tottenham in a Spanish bar. No old Bill. No cameras. Stoke easily shade the numbers. Tottenham have the age and experience. We see it as a major scalp. They see it as a northern nuisance that needs putting in its place. Bang! It went off mental, as both sides tore into each other, using tables and chairs as the preliminary assault weapons, then bottles and koshes for the hand-to-hand stuff. It was a 60-second affair, with much of the pub completely trashed in the exchange of weaponry. It went Tottenham's way for most of that minute, with Stoke fighting backwards towards a wall. With backs against that wall, Stoke made their charge, screaming as one, and moved the Cockneys out of the bar onto the terrace. Outside, the fight continued as a massed chair and table brawl with pockets of 2-on-2 exchanges. Missiles rained down from a rooftop bar, causing injury to several of our numbers. Brasso, Rhino, and 4 or 5 others charged up a set of stairs under fire and took it to the fleeing Cockneys, slugging it out amongst the tables, chairs, and overturned parasols. The sound of Spanish sirens, thoughts of Spanish police, Spanish courts, Spanish jail. No thanks. Both sides hit the streets. All of a sudden, it was every man for himself or face a severe beating and a stiff prison sentence. "Fuck off! Get the fuck off me, you Spanish bastard!" I could not detach that waiter from my shirt sleeve. He was hanging on, determined to see me arrested. Shit. Now another one of them was on me. It started to sink in that I was in a lot of trouble. I was on my own. No one else had been caught, and not a soul was left except me. I struggled wildly as they pulled me inside the Green Parrot. All the time, one of them was trying to kick my legs from under me, and it was starting to get right on my fucking nerves. I blew and basically ripped my shirt from my body and pulled the 2 Spaniards in a wrenching motion towards me. I butted one and gouged my fingers into the other's eyes. It gained me a couple of seconds, and that was when the panic hit me. Outside to my right, I could now see the flashing lights of the police vehicles and hear people shouting and a dog barking in a van. These 2 Spanish bastards in front of me were starting to come round, and I couldn't get out through the front door of the place without getting necked. With no choice, I ran blind through some swing doors into the kitchen. I scanned it quickly and saw my way out was through another door that led to a waste area below street level. The only real problem I could see was that the wall leading up to the street in my escape looked about 7 feet tall, and the only things visible to climb up on were dustbins full of vegetable peelings and raw fish slops. Fuck it, I bolted towards the door, just as several Spaniards crashed through the swing doors into the kitchen behind me. One lunged forward in an attempt to collar me. Dodging him, I vaulted a work surface and slid hopelessly on the greasy floor. At that point, I thought the game was up, as my fall had lost me valuable seconds. I picked up a large label as I rose, and I flung it at the nearest Spaniard. He cowered, and I continued to run. As soon as I had made it into the waste area, I pretty much accepted my dire situation and chose to make a fight of it. There was no way I would be able to climb out with that lot on my back. So I picked up a garbage bin, raised it above my head, and hurled it at the 2 men, who were now armed with knives they had picked up from the kitchen. After the bin hit them, they brandished their weapons at me with intent. My only hope was to hold them off until the police came and arrested me. At least, I'd only get a beating off them. I was gutted. I hadn't even seen the sea yet, and my well-deserved break was nearly over. "Jasp, hang on, mate!" My backup team came climbing down from the rooftop bar as they fled their own situation. A billboard crashed down from the street above and landed right on top of the unsuspecting Spaniards' heads, sending them reeling. Next, a bicycle was hurled down on the recovering duo. Bloody hell, I was expecting a taxi next. Brasso, loyal as ever, was standing up above me, frothing at the mouth and going berserk. Anything that came to hand was hurled down with venom, as he brought me that much-needed time I thought I had run out of. I reached up to grab hold of something that would take my weight, but kept slipping back down into the slops. It was frantic stuff, because the police had now reached inside the kitchens and could probably see me attempting my escape. Rhino appeared next to Brass and told him to take his weight. The two stood firm and reached over. With everything I had, I jumped hard, and Rhino's clasped hand pulled firmly enough for me to get a leg up. Then, all three of us were gone, laughing into the pitch-black, crazy nightscape. Back at the hotel, we summed up the injuries. Bry had lost his front teeth, and Eddie had broken his hand, but they were all still laughing about it, and everyone was buzzing. That first night had delivered everything they had wanted, and with the right type of people as well. I had to laugh too, but later on, it did dawn on me that I had come extremely close to being badly cut, or even nicked and locked up. On this particular night, I owed it to my old mate Brasso and Rhino from the Vale for saving my neck. It just goes to show, no matter how far you push it, if you're with the right set of lads, there is always a good chance you will get through any kind of situation, even one you think is beyond desperate. And it doesn't half bring you closer together as well. Because we had booked only flights and not accommodation, Eddie and I split up and bunked into other people's rooms in a hotel called the Don Bigotti. I was in with Turney and Tomo, and Eddie was with Stico and Quinny, whilst Brasso was bunked into the Hotel 33. Neither hotel was suitable for us lot, really, and the staff and other holidaymakers were visibly gutted when we showed up. Mainly filled with Germans and Scandinavians, they were both quiet and relaxed places, until we got round the pools late in the afternoons and had bombing competitions. How many bulldog tattoos around that patio? Unbelievable. If I'd have been one of those guests, I'd have hated us too. Eddie and I went looking for Brasso and walked together along a parched road, crossing over towards what we hoped was the Hotel 33 reception. Outside, lying unconscious and face up in the gutter, was Psycho Johnson, an eccentric, over-intelligent flat top who drank with us in Hanley and who had without doubt earned his reputation of being a full-bore loon. He was barefoot, wearing combat shorts and a white Bundesliga vest with dog tags. In one hand was an empty bottle of vodka. In the other, which was across his chest, was clenched his soggy passport. We stepped over Johns and walked into the hotel, agreeing that this must be the right place. Brasso was coming out as we were going in, highly amused that he had just seen Rhino plant a huge diver's knife in the reception desk and place his shades on top of the handle while he waited for his key. Fucking hell, these Vale lot are unruly, I thought to myself. As we were leaving, I passed a paralytic Gazamella, sitting on the hotel steps with streams of piss running down the inside of his bare legs. His attempts to stand up and speak to me while he still peed himself were hysterical. I liked these lads, especially Gaza, who went on to be a veteran of the Rotherthorpe riot against Manchester City's firm. And Rhino, well, I owed him one. That's what the days were mostly like. For the lads with money, it was chilled. Football on the beach, North Stoke v South Stoke, drinking competitions, and making lists while window shopping for designer wear and perfumes. The days for skint members, like the urchin, were spent trawling behind the others, robbing to order and ticking off the list as and when. There were some light-fingered bastards amongst us. Several of the lads had bumped into a large party of girls who said they were from Derby, and a couple of them claimed to know me, though I was certain they did not. Derby? Nah. Nevertheless, I was told that a couple of them were more than a little inquisitive about me, and had told the lads to bring me out that night to meet them. I wasn't that bothered about the women. I was already pissed off that me and Eddie, a childhood mate, had been involved in a set-to over some Irish birds he had chatted up the previous night. They were in green and white Benetton shirts and were laughing around and enjoying all the attention of my mates, who should have known better. Yeah, go on, you bastards. You all have a fucking good time together whilst our lads are over there in Ulster taking shit off 'em. Well, that was where my head was at the time, still in Armagh. I exploded and attacked both parties with tables and chairs, resulting in everyone scattering for cover, and me and Ed, the last men standing. 15 years earlier, Ed and I fought our first playground scrap as 5-year-olds. Ed probably felt a bit guilty about hitting me on that occasion with a cricket stump and had carried it with him for years. Well, tonight, we both let that memory go, shook hands and forgot it. We walked off laughing together and headed towards Stoke Joe's. Ed commented along the way. She was a tight cow anyway. Didn't buy a drink all fucking night. I refused the offer of meeting the Derby birds. Tonight I think I'm going to have a quiet one, lads. You can shag 'em instead. No worries. They all knew I'd be out and off my trolley with them later. I was out that night and in a worse state than I had been in all holidays so far. Reports got back to some of the lads who were having another scout around the Green Parrot for Tottenham that I had just closed Stoke Joe's by pulling the air conditioning system off the ceiling. I vaguely remember doing something like that, but hanging down off the blades of a huge rotating fan with my shorts down by my ankles and pissing over dancing women as I spun around. I'm not sure about that one, but the lads insist on it, so I suppose I'd better believe them. By all accounts, the fan came crashing down from the ceiling and caused mayhem amongst the revellers. I'd single-handedly closed down the club after a week full of promises to the owner that we would start behaving. One or two of our lot decided to get me off the streets before I got arrested. It was probably a good idea. "Oi, hey up!" The shouts came from our mates inside a softly lit roadside bar. By now, I was sober enough to go in and have a drink, as we had been walking for ages. My 4 escorts and I decided it was time for one more for the road and have a chat about the night's capers. It was a popular place, still busy at 3 a.m, and the music was soft and welcoming. I lowered my head as I entered through an open window and greeted everyone with a wry grin. I noticed the alcove they occupied had 2 big tables in a line, and both were piled with empty glasses and packed with people. There were around 15 of our lads and the same number of women, none of whom I'd met before. I did notice straight away, as I struck up a conversation with Quinny, that 2 of the girls were discreetly acknowledging my arrival. "Jasper, how are you, mate? We've been told that you've trashed the HQ." Quinny and most of the others started laughing as they ordered up some beers for the new arrivals. I don't think I was given enough time to even start to answer my friend before one of the women was up furiously out of her seat. She flew across the table and flung a half-full glass which passed inches from my face. Wow. Everybody stood up at once and began to argue viciously with one another. I did not need anyone to explain to me that these were clearly the women from Derby who had been asking about me so much. They squared up to me in what seemed like slow motion, their mouths going 10 to the dozen, fingers pointing, heads moving backwards and forwards as they aggressively spoke their minds. All I could think of, as I watched a load of fanatical women being staved off me by a load of football casuals, was that they were from a football background themselves. They had that dress sense, that aggression, that aura. The penny dropped as I homed in on the original aggressor. "These birds aren't from Derby. They're Forest," I said. I froze as I stared at a woman who truly looked like she wanted to kill me. She believed that I was the person responsible for cutting the throat of her boyfriend at a game against Nottingham Forest the previous season, an incident for which I was arrested, though later released, and which ultimately marked the beginning of the end of my already tarnished army career. She bombarded me with accusations, but I don't think I answered her. There was no point, as Eddie now had her round the throat. It was all getting messy, and very soon the management called the Guardia Civil. The women left, and then we went before any of us were arrested. I, for one, did not fancy getting thrown in a van with any of that lot. They were wild and would have torn us to bits. On the way back up the hill to our hotel, the lads laughed and joked about the girls and how game they had been. I agreed, and believe me, until they left the resort 3 nights later, I was well on my toes. That woman was not going to give me the opportunity to explain that it was not me that had carried out the knifing. She wanted my blood, and I was expecting a glass or a blade at any minute. I went to bed that night, full of thought, but not for 1 minute knowing that this feud would carry on for years to come. Tensions even continued in Sydney, Australia in the late 80s. But there you go. That's football, I suppose. The moped dealers could speak perfectly good English, but chose not to because they had every intention of ripping us off one way or another when we returned the bikes. I think it was Johnson's idea for us all to get bikes. He was nuts about them and often put on shows at home by speeding past a packed pub on one wheel of his ZR, usually waving with one hand and giving us a sick grin. That day, 80 of us hired yellow mopeds and marauded mostly twos up around Magaluf, looking for mischief. Drinking and driving, not a great idea, and it wasn't a good idea either to forget to wear any protection from the sun. By late afternoon, most of us were dehydrating and burnt to a crisp. It was thought by many that amphetamine sulfate crystals bought from a West African lucky man earlier in the week would be a good cure for the burnt arms and shoulders. Not everyone indulged, but sufficient did to make the final lap of the resort a memorable affair. We mounted and set off like a posse of Texas Rangers. Psycho Johnson immediately took pole position and shouted for us all to follow him, whatever happened, and anyone who didn't was a pussy. A challenge had been laid down, and we all took it up. Heading down the main drag in the centre of Magaluf was the road that we had lovingly christened the Street of 1,000 Offs, because it had been a battlefield each night of the holiday so far. Johns scattered holiday makers off the road and brushed them like a wave over the pavement into bar fronts as they fled the menace on the moped. We followed on, 80 strong, filling the width of the now empty road. Everyone roared with laughter at the bemused expressions of the clubbers as we streamed past tooting our horns. It's that fucking Stoke lot again. Wankers! On we headed like a herd, stopping for nothing and no one. Johnson took a right turn and we all followed. Down the hill, gathering speed in the direction of the prom and straight towards a multitude of packed out, brightly lit cafes and restaurants. I eased off the accelerator, as did several others. Johnson sped along like a suicide bomber onto the pavement and sent a couple of waiters sprawling as he burst through a restaurant's covered terracing. On he went, in and out of tables full of diners. Some found it hysterical, whilst others sat utterly shocked. Johnson headed on, wheels spinning into another restaurant and then the next, before returning to the road and us. I was amazed nobody had been hurt. From where I was, it looked like each family sitting outside those restaurants had been alerted by the noise, and most could see that the safest thing to do was to keep still and not panic. Such was the expertise Johnson showed on that motorcycle. Every obstacle was navigated and dodged, and every set of steps descended perfectly. It really was a marvel of skill, and people at several tables applauded the slight disruption between courses. How do you follow that? Johnson pulled a wheelie and headed off on another mission, and we all called it a day and headed back to the Don Bigotti. The sun had taken its toll on a lot of us, and we were knackered, and so it was decided a quiet night in the hotel disco was the best option. Besides, it would give us a chance to have a look at some brummy birds who had turned up that morning. One of them was big, like Emmerdale's Lisa Dingle. Just up my street. We hadn't bothered with the hotel disco until now. A couple of the lads had kept saying it was full of fanny every night, but fanny to the majority of us meant later on, after we'd had a kick-off. I could never understand why lads would stand round leering at a group of women when there was fun to be had with the boys. Our rule was, who wants to play army? No girls. I mean, when you're with the lads, you're with the lads. They were right, though. The disco was rammed with women, and the Brummies were in there too. We moved in. The girls were a party of 20 from West Bromwich and followed the baggies. They were pretty well turned out and seemed to know about the game and our culture. I mean, I don't mind talking to girls when you can mention football, and it's even more of a bonus when they like football hooligans as well. One big bird had 2 pinches of my arse in 10 minutes. She's fucking having it tonight, mate. Hoolie style. The club was below the hotel, and to get in you had to turn right at reception and go down a steep set of stairs. The club had 2 mirrored bars, a large square dance floor, a seated area at the bottom, and then a massive set of glass-panelled doors that were pulled open. Out through them, and down a small cobbled winding path through an ornamental garden, was the swimming pool and patio. The pool was lit up bright blue, and the gardens had solar lights dotted around, giving it a relaxed ambience. It was just right, not too hectic, and no other football lads to keep your eye on. And she keeps giving me the eye big time. Let's have another beer. 20 minutes later, the atmosphere was shattered as hysterical screams drowned the music. I sat up in my seat beside the patio doors and saw a wave of people on the move, running blindly towards us. As people found cover, a huge gap opened up across the dance floor, giving me a glimpse of a yellow moped arriving at the foot of the club's staircase. It was a slightly more inebriated Johns, and it looked like his bike trip was coming to a finale right here in our hotel disco. The dance floor was now completely empty of the 200 or so previous occupants, and Johns took to it, wheels spinning the moped round and round and round, faster and faster, burning rubber and gritting his teeth like a man taking 9 lashes of the cat. Amazed, we all looked on. Once more, those that were out of danger revelled at his skill, and some, like us, even clapped and cheered him on. In a flash, John shot from the dance floor like a glass off a Ouija board, straight past our seats, out through the doors to the patio, and on towards the pool. Everyone looked in disbelief as he tore through the gardens and rode his bike straight into the deep end of the pool. Splash! He disappeared under a mass of bubbles and surfaced seconds later to uproar. Calmly climbing out of the pool at the other side, a sodden Johns disappeared briefly into some shrubbery and was then seen scaling a wall before vanishing from sight. God only knows what else he had got up to before he had arrived at the Don Bigotti. Show over. Now where's that Brummy bitch who was pinching my arse? I've always had a thing about women with a fuller figure. I find them extremely stunning facially. They do it for me big time. As far as I'm concerned, there is nothing better than lying there casually watching a voluptuous redhead dining on you. And that's exactly what I was doing 30 minutes later. She liked him a lot, I could tell. Slurping away in front of me, she had that look of contentment. I decided that now was not the best time to ask her a name, so I grabbed a handful of her flaming red hair and yanked her head to one side. I gritted my teeth and forced my swollen bulbous deeper into her throat and started pumping, slowly but forcefully. She grunted appreciatively and grabbed hold of my big shaft with her second hand. Breathing heavily, like a baited bull, I noticed the dimples on her knuckles, her cute rounded nose with little nostrils, her perfectly formed pouting lips done in cherry red, the heavy black and light green eyeliner that gave her that colour climax image. Oh, yes. Uncontrollably, I blurted it out. Where do you want this lot, bitch? My grip on her hair became increasingly tighter as I began to feel that universal sensation of tension release quickly rushing further and further along my shaft. In my mouth. I want it in my mouth. She sounded nasal, but fair play, still managed to get her words out before I exploded in her mouth right on cue, right where she asked for it. I must have hit her with both barrels because she started to gag heavily, but still refused to stop swallowing my load. I was impressed with the determination to savour every last drop. It was one of those moments of pure filth, when you are in the right place at the right time with a stranger who has the same liberal sexual morals as yourself. A time when two people can let go of their inhibitions and become a right pair of sleazy, dirty bastards with each other's bodies, and then never meet again. If only it was always like that. Like a cat who had got the cream, she finished off and looked me directly in the eyes. She gave her top lip a long, slow lick, and with a giggle said, "Oh, I'm Sammy, by the way. Hi, Sammy. Nice to meet you." The lads dubbed her the Whale of Magaluf, and joked that she was so big that I was probably shagging the rolls of fat between her legs when I did her from behind in the shower. I reckoned that they just hadn't got the bollocks to be seen with a woman who isn't one of your slim model-type lookers. I mean, no fit birds would go near them anyway, because they were always so off their heads and usually scrapping. A commotion in the corridor tore me from Sammy's bosom right on cue. I left her room to see a hyped-up Cockney Mark running up and down the corridor screaming loudly. He and Mick Pender had been drinking heavily together for days. Mark had lost the plot and had started running over the tops of parked cars. On their return to the hotel, one or both had pulled a radiator off the wall in their room and hurled it blind off a fifth-floor balcony. The radiator had plummeted to the ground and crashed through the middle of a table tennis table, obliterating one half of it. Luckily for them, it wasn't the other half, because lying flat out in a drunken stupor on the other side of the net was a now shocked and slightly miffed Eddie. Even I find that kind of behaviour extreme, as someone from outside of our party could have been an innocent victim there. As Mark was dragged screaming from the hotel by the police, I wasn't surprised when one of them turned to us and pointed to his head in a rotating motion. "He's loco crazy, no?" "Well, yeah, he is, mate. That's why he knocks about with us lot." None of us were shocked to find out the next morning from the police that Mark had been taken to a psychiatric unit at the local hospital. They were going to keep him in for a couple of days to run some tests on him to decide whether he was insane or not. On his release, Mark claimed he had spent some time in a secure unit matching up patterns and putting shaped bricks through the right-shaped holes. "Fucking hell," he said. "I was only pissed up. It was that banana liqueur that Lily kept pinching from the offie." I'd tried it too, but it was minging. It was a sobering experience for our friend, who came pretty close to being sectioned into a Spanish mental hospital. The mood around the pool that afternoon was one of excited anticipation. It was rumoured that a crew of Millwall's older bushwhackers had been sighted in several of the downtown bars the previous night. Tonight, we would all get ready and go out together. "Right, that's it then, lads. Millwall are in town. We meet on the roof of the Green Parrot at 9. Agreed?" Tremendous. We spotted two of them from our rooftop stronghold. They walked along in discussion, completely oblivious to the prying menace of 100 youths above them. They were old school, you could tell, probably in their late 30s or early 40s. They were thick-set, chunky bastards as well, and they strolled along with an ingrained confidence. I know I'm not just speaking for myself, but just those two alone sent a shiver of fear up my spine. Fuck me, I thought. I wonder what 30 of that lot looked like together. A huge rush of excitement flashed through our ranks. This was going to be the big one, and all sorts of suggestions flew around. "Let's try and draw them onto the beach and have it with them there in some space." "Nah, fuck that. Let's just hit them hard and unannounced. Steam the pub they're in. That's the best way." 2 scouts were duly appointed, and the 2 unsuspecting bushwhackers were tailed from there on. Or so we thought. The rest of us continued to drink and make plans for what we hoped would be the biggest result of our hoolie careers so far: the destruction and annihilation of Millwall's infamous bushwhacker crew. We had no idea how many of the South London mob we would be facing, or how we would fare against them. All I could remember was the trepidation we had felt as kids, either travelling to the Den on the supporters' coaches or stood on a packed boothing end, waiting for Harry the dog and his F-troop to turn up and bash us with their infamous Millwall bricks, which were made from rolled-up newspaper, but could do as much damage as a house brick. The general feeling amongst us was cold impatience as we waited for our spotters to return with the Millwall location. What the fuck do you mean you've lost them? It was a disappointing blow, and also a bit worrying. How could we know whether the scouts had been sussed and we were now the ones being stalked? What if Millwall were on their way to us with a bigger mob than ours, one pissed off that we'd had the audacity to even think about going there with them? "Tool up!" went the cry. We immediately went into the offensive mode, but kept the elevation of the rooftop as our advantage. For a brief moment, I felt like Davy Crockett, stood on top of the Alamo, waiting for Santa Anna and his Mexican army to arrive. Only this was different. The enemy we were expecting to appear from the burrow of hidden streets down below were a lot fucking harder than a bunch of Mexicanos. These at the time were the worst and most feared football supporters in our country, therefore the world. It's amazing what kind of scenarios your brain can play out before you at times of adrenaline intoxication. Yeah, it's real. We live like this. What do you do for your kicks? Play scale extric in your loft conversion, the one with the two-seater sofa for when all your mates come around. Yeah, that's right. You get your buzz out of watching two racing cars ripping round the same track time after time. We get our buzz out of being scared out of our minds and having to survive a precarious situation before we can cross the winning line and lift that little silver replica cup that your auntie bought you for your 14th birthday. That's if we haven't ended up in casualty. We might not be liked or tolerated by society, but what we do is far closer to our ancestry than people think. You've all just got carried away with your suppressive progression and left your real world discarded in the gutter. Fucking bring it on, Millwall. We won't let you down. We share the same chromosomes, the little aggressive ones that for centuries generals have called upon to march that little bit further and to take that fortified hill at all costs to raise the Union Jack. And then count the dead bodies of your friends before you can have a brew. See? That's what we are. There's no need to press gang us, mate. We're going anyway. There's the hype. Let's see if the battle lives up to it. When the scouts returned with the news that they had lost the two bushwhackers, we should have known that the night was going to be a disaster. After an hour of waiting for the Cockneys to appear, most of us had given it up as a bad job, and we stood down and got pissed. Nah, they're not going to show. They probably aren't even bothered about us lot anyway. How many of us were secretly relieved? I suppose we will never know. But I, for one, was not, and nor were Brasso and Turney. 15 of us decided to take up the trail where the scouts had lost sight of them, down by Manilo's bar. It was always happy hour at Manilo's, 2 beers for the price of 1, or gargantuan measures of cheap vodka in ice-filled glasses. Happy to indulge, we spent the next 3 hours in self-obliteration, completely forgetting the real reason for being in this part of the resort. It was on the way back up to Stokio Joe's for the last hour that things took a turn for the worse. Up ahead, across the street, 5 of our lads were being smashed all over the place by a huge Swedish fella. He was well over 6'5", in his 40s, and a dead ringer for Hulk Hogan. He wore tight leather trousers and a white vest, had a head of white hair which went down his back and the same coloured goatee beard. In each of his hands he held a wooden baseball bat, with which he was knocking the living daylights out of our friends. We all immediately charged, some picking up chairs and billboards to use as weapons. All 15 of us encircled Hogan and attempted to inflict some damage, but everything we threw bounced ineffectively off him, and he grew even more furious at our arrival. 20 people were now trying to get close enough to bring him down for the kill, but each was dealt a painful blow as Hogan staved off his attackers with acute accuracy. The man was an animal, and none of us was getting anywhere near him. Instead, he was effectively picking each of us off. Sooner or later, we would not be fit enough to fight the man. It was time for an enforced tactical retreat. Either that or get done. With the advantage of the hill, he backed us down it, occasionally darting forward and catching an unsuspecting victim with another heavy blow. Every cafe he marched us past was relieved of a chair or a discarded bottle, which were thrown back up at the Swede to no avail. This cunt was going to end up following us back to the hotel room and bashing us there if we couldn't get away from him. With no choice, we all turned and broke into a jog, some of us laughing, and others fuming that we were on our toes. Fuck him, let's just get away from the bastard. We had emphatically been done by a mean but slightly gay-looking Hulk Hogan. How come the fucking police only turn up when you're getting the result and enjoying yourself? Asked someone. Good question, but for now, let's just get down this side street and away from that madman. We did, and for a brief moment caught our breath and saw the funny side of things. Sod it, it's just one of those things. The geezer was an animal, that's all. Let's get in that bar over there and have a drink. We headed under the canopy of the nearest bar to us and all simultaneously stopped dead in our tracks. That rearing lion, the badge, and the blue shirt it was embroidered on was all it took to take our breath. Millwall. They were an ugly sight, while we must have looked like rabbits caught in headlights. We had all succumbed by our body language alone. The Viking had knocked our confidence and left us clueless and looking gormless. Several of the Londoners were standing by the entrance, and it was one of these who made the first remark about the scruffs across the street. With that, they all stood up, 30 of them, half men, half women. Turney was first in. I remember gasping as he crossed my vision and landed a flying dropkick right into the advancing bushwhackers. Fell straight on his arse and was rewarded with a boot right under his chin. It sent him skidding across the road and he remained motionless where he landed. That's it, isn't it? When one of your mates has just been sparked out in front of you, it just happens. All the anxieties disappear and the fear ebbs, giving you that split-second mass injection of adrenaline. And off you go. We clashed head-on with Millwall in a narrow back street lit only by the odd neon bar sign. It was shadowy and disguised punches, direction and weight. These South Londoners knew the business and dished it out to us good style. When their blows connected, bones crunched and teeth flew out. We took casualties almost immediately. With tables and chairs and whatever came to hand, we tried to hold off the mob long enough for Turney to be retrieved and brought to his feet. I don't think any of us actually stood trading punches with them. We used tools, they used fists. At one point, I was singled out and stood like a lion tamer brandishing half a bar stool and swinging it about me wildly to keep them back. Bang! A sidewinder to the temple dropped me into the gutter. Dazed, I hit the ground and looked up at a complete massacre with all my mates and potential rescuers in pretty much the same situation as myself. I decided to crawl under a nearby parked car and curl up. I had no choice. My legs had gone. Under the car, I caught my breath and took a horizontal view of the melee. I knew who was with me because I could recognize the footwear. It just bothered me that many of them seemed lifeless. Fucking hell, we were getting battered here. It's an awful sinking feeling when you are being ragged like this. In the space of 10 minutes, we had been trashed all over the place twice. Fortunately for me and the rest of us, the women called a halt to it, and like lambs, the bushwhackers were led away from the carnage. Thank fuck they had their women with them. This might seem absurd, but that night we all went home bruised and battered, but proud as fuck. I reckon we were even prouder than if we had got the result against the Cockneys. Being done as badly as that by the top firm in the country gave us a certain kudos amongst the rest of our crew and elevated us to almost cult status. We were the ones who stood and got battered by Millwall. something that most people would fear throughout their entire football hooligan career. Not for us 20, though. Our fear was now gone, and one day we told ourselves we would overturn that result. Hulk Hogan, in contrast, has rarely been mentioned over the years, and I would like to give the man his due. I'm in my 50s now, and believe me, I would not for 1 minute fancy taking on a gang of 20 bloodthirsty teenagers with a point to prove. So every credit to you, Mr. Hogan. As for the rest of the lads that missed out on the Millwall brawl, they were all gutted. It was one not to miss. My well-deserved break was coming to an end. Tonight was our last night on the island, and to celebrate, we were all going to get pissed up. Stoke Joe's was packed out. The next lot of visitors were arriving in the resort, providing fresh toddy and hopefully another firm to play with. It had already gone off with a crew of Bristol Rovers when I arrived inside the club. By all accounts, it had been a bloody affair, resulting in Bristol being driven out of the club and the owner threatening to close his venue unless we calmed down. Despite the action, I was handed another batch of free drinks tickets. Why give us free alcohol when all it does is fuel the fire? Never mind. Can I have a large one, please, love? The DJ had been under pressure to find some decent punks since we had got there. Pretty Vacant by the Pistols was followed by the Jams down in the tube station at midnight, and we went berserk on the dance floor. It was whilst jumping off one of the speakers that I noticed her at the side of the dance floor. She was alone, and her stare was fixed on every movement I made. With an attractive female viewer taking notice of me, I calmed a little and regained my football casual composure. I turned to look again, and she was gone. Hello. She startled me as she appeared from nowhere. She held 2 glasses of vodka and handed one to me. I liked her directness immediately. I grinned and took a sip. Jesus, that's strong. She moved in a little closer and cupped my balls in the palm of her hand. She looked mischievous and told me to drink some more, as she liked her men to do exactly as they were told. I wanted to butt her in a sexual manner, but instead I slipped my hand up inside her skirt and ran my fingers across the contour of her crotch. It felt warm and padded with pussy fur. I liked it and glanced round to see if any of the lads were watching. Still pogoing to Temple Tudor, they were all in their own mad worlds. This has got to be worth a quick knee trembler down on the beach, I thought to myself. After all my preaching to the lads, here I was about to break the unwritten rule of sleazing off with a woman without telling the rest of them what I was up to. Bad drill. But I did it all the same. Excessive vodka, punk music, thrashing through your body, and now a sex spot stroking my Hampton to boot. What else was I supposed to do? We left the club unnoticed by anyone except Digger. It was only when we got outside into the light that I noticed that my new friend was a lot older than I had first thought. What's your name? I asked. Deb, she replied, as she led me away by the hand. Jesus, I thought, this bitch is well after it. She was definitely in her 30s, a mature woman to me at the time. I'm in for a right treat here, I thought smugly. I followed on like a little schoolboy who was about to lose his cherry. Deb did not like my idea of a quick suck and a fuck down on the beach. She insisted that she wanted me for the night, and we were going to go back to her hotel room, or nothing at all. Okay, if you insist. I was a little bit surprised to find that Deb was only actually staying in a cheap 1-star hotel, nothing more than a posh pension in a back street of the old town. I shrugged it off and followed her inside to her first-floor room. I wasn't exactly Rockefeller myself, so I retrained my thoughts onto sex. Deb sat me down on the bed and told me to wait a minute while she went to the bathroom. I kicked off my boaters and relaxed back on the bed before pulling my foreskin back for a quick cheese and fluff check. Come on then, hurry up. She was more than a minute getting ready, so I spent the time scanning the room. It was small, probably only a single room. It had a balcony with a solitary chair that overlooked a park. Inside was a small wardrobe, a bedside table, and a chest of drawers at the foot of the bed. Above that was a mirror. Nice, I thought as I admired myself. I'll be able to see myself do the business in that. To the left of the mirror was the door that led into the small ensuite. Looking back, I wasn't that clever, as I didn't notice that the room contained no personal effects at all. That should have set the alarm bells ringing. I began to get horny again as I remembered our little meeting just over an hour ago. I knew it was going to be rough sex the minute she bit me hard on the nape of my neck. I responded by pinching the inside of her thigh even harder. She did not flinch. Fuck, I love bitches that don't flinch. Just as I was about to drift off into a sexual fantasy, the bathroom door opened and Deb re-entered the room. At last. I was immediately disappointed as she looked no different to when she first went in. "Where's the fucking suzzies, love?" She said nothing as she walked slowly towards me. I braced myself for something a bit special. All she had gone on about on the walk back was how much she wanted to suck my cock. Seeing as she hadn't made the effort to dress up for me, I figured she could get on with the promised blowjob. I glanced at the mirror for one last look at my reflection when I was hit with a bolt of ice-cold fear. The light had been left on in the bathroom with the door still open. It shone behind Deb as she moved towards me, illuminating everything, including the knife she had behind her back. She saw my expression change and lunged, bringing the knife towards me in a swishing fashion across my neck. Panic-stricken, I moved fast, avoiding the knife on its first swipe and making a grab for her hand before it came back round and finished its job. The pain was immense as the blade cut through my 3 middle fingers to the bone. By mistake, I had grabbed the blade. The shock of it all brought me to my senses, and I jumped off the bed and started to scream at the woman. I dodged around the bed, avoiding her almost silent attack. All I could hear was my own shouts, and I could see her psychotic eyes behind the glint of the blade. I fucking shit myself in that room. She reminded me of Evelyn Draper, Jessica Walters' psycho chick in the Clint Eastwood movie Play Misty for Me. On and on she came at me as I threw anything that came to hand in an attempt to stave her off and get to the door. Blood now covered everything. I was desperately attempting to avoid the knife whilst trying to get a good grip on her and get out of the room. She started to tire, and I could see it. The whole thing had gone on for less than a minute, but a lot of adrenaline had been exerted by both of us. I knew this was my chance, and I made a dash for the balcony and threw myself off it blind, leaving my best pair of deck shoes behind. Fuck it, you can have 'em, love. I'm out of here. I landed badly on the grass below, hurting my knee, both ankles, and bit through my bottom lip. But it did not stop me from getting up and running off. I was out of there before anybody had been alerted and the old bill turned up. "Jasp! Jasp! Quick, mate, over here!" I couldn't believe my luck. Sat in a tree nearby was Digger. He had followed us on the off chance of some tag team action and had climbed the tree for a better look. He had seen the whole thing through the balcony window and was in as much of a hurry to get away from there as I was. He jumped down and helped me to my feet, and we both ran off back to the Don Bigotti. Now, I'm not going to start throwing accusations about what happened that night. I'm going to tread a little tentatively. To this day, I haven't got a clue what happened there. Either I was the victim of retribution, or I just happened to meet a real fruitcake. I suppose I'll never know. I was glad to get back to Stoke the next day, though. I think we all were. What a mess we looked getting off that plane with all the scars, wounds, broken bones and bandages. Anybody would have thought that we'd all been involved in a horrific crash, not returning from a fortnight's well-deserved break.